Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this conversation today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Preston Cox. I was born and raised here in Stamford in 1987 and graduated in 2006. Moved away for a little bit and now came back in 2021. And so I can say now I've lived here most of my life, and I'm proud to be a citizen of Stamford. So today what I wanted to do is there's a lot of conversation that's happening right now about the future of Stamford, what's happening with some of the projects that are on in Jones County. And I thought there would be no better person to talk to than our mayor, James Decker. And so we're very honored to have you join us for this conversation today and to talk about some of the things that are ongoing and how the city is involved in the growth and the management during this time. And so I'm a concerned citizen, just like you probably. I have a lot of questions. I'll be really honest, James and I are friends. We have these conversations offline a lot, and but the questions that I'm asking today, we were talking before, I don't really know the answers to some of these, and so I'm anxious to hear some of your response. So James, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to be here. You know, some of our friends over in Haskell, Christina Isbell, Mayor, and City Council Member Eric Lewis, they've done a couple of videos, and some folks at Stamford asked to me about, hey, why don't you do a video to kind of talk about the Stamford perspective? And I kicked that around over the weeks. Video is not really my strong suit, because otherwise I'm just going to have to hold up a camera in front of myself at my desk. Thankfully, we've got some good professional help here doing this that has a little more skill than I do. But I think it's important for folks to know what's going on. You know, we've talked about these issues in city council meetings to the extent that we're making decisions for our citizens. But hey, you know, I ran for city council well over a decade and a half ago, because I care about the future of Stamford. Mm-hmm. And moved back to our community to raise my family and have a business because I care about Stamford and want to see it thrive and prosper into the future. And I ran for mayor in 2018 and successively for re-election several times for that same purpose. I mean, these are issues that matter to me on a very deep and personal level. Because if Stamford is not a good place in the future, either due to things that changed it in ways that are not positive or that it dies off, that's not going to be any more satisfactory to me than it is to anybody else that cares about Stamford. You know, my platform for mayor was better Stamford. Yeah. And I mean that. So that's how I view the prism of all of these issues that we're facing and opportunities. You know, somebody said a few weeks ago on Facebook that they were excited but cautious and concerned. And I told her, I said, I think that's the best way possible to say it. That's kind of how I feel. You know, there are folks that think everything is, that may change, may not be good. There's folks that think everything that changed may be great. I'm like her. I think there's something in the middle here. Like, there's some really good opportunities in front of us, but they need to be handled with wise leadership, using all the information that we have available to us at the time, and look through the prism of the better Stamford of everything that we do.
Yeah, I think that's a good jumping off point for our first question. And I think I've been on the back end of some of these questions. I served as the Chamber of Commerce manager for a few years and was able to hear some of these conversations behind closed doors, which was great. But I've been out of the loop since leaving that position. And so I'm just curious, man, like what are the projects that are on the table? What's all the buzz about? What is prompting a lot of this change? What's going on? Can you give us some high level things?
So the big thing that everybody's talking about, the big excitement, enthusiasm, concern relates to data centers. And somebody asked me what a data center was several months ago. And the best way I know to put it, the simplest possible terms, because the technology is beyond me too. It's a giant warehouse full of computers. And you hear about things being saved on the cloud, all the stuff that we put on Facebook, on YouTube, like this video, everything, Dropbox, all the stuff, all the data that's being created, which is many more times of data than has ever existed in the world, is being created every day. It all has to be stored somewhere. You can't put it on your floppy disk. You and me of a certain age, we had the 3.5-inch floppy disks. It's all on a cloud somewhere and that's what it is. It's basically a worldwide network of computer storage. The cloud computing, the data centers, they have grown over the last 20 years. That's been a growing thing in America. Where we're seeing the explosion right now is what they call artificial intelligence. I've got my own opinions on how intelligent it actually is, but ChatGPT, all these things where people are trying to automate processes and automate thinking and whatnot. That is driving a large portion of the data center explosion, not just here outside of Stanford, but all over Texas and all over the world. There's a gigantic one that's going to be the largest one ever built going in Amarillo. There's the Stargate project that's some AI stuff related to the Open AI, which owns ChatGPT, and also maybe some Department of Defense stuff that's happening in Abilene. So all of that stuff is going on, and the stuff that's being developed around the lake. It's no secret. We're not talking about out of turn here. It's Google. Everybody knows it's Google. There's some properties there, but actually the first of these data center projects developed almost a decade ago. Because they were just kind of learning about the community when they came and talked to me after they bought the property. And what attracts data center developers to places like Jones and Haskell County is two things: cheap land and cheap electricity.
Yeah.
Out at Lake Stamford, several years ago, when all of the wind development in far west Texas was built, they built these new power lines, and they built a new transmission substation called Clear Crossing, just south of the lake at the intersection of Loop Road. And then there's all the substations on the other side of the lake at the side of the old WTU power plant. So Lake Stamford is a interconnection point for a lot of cheap power coming from the west and going to the east. And there are several new solar projects, the one that was built south of Lake Stamford several years ago, and it has since expanded, and there's a new project going in there. So the power is cheap at that node, at that interconnection point, and then they're adding more power to it. So what they like about, people have talked about, and we'll talk about the water deal in a minute, but, locating next to Lake Stanford, to get the water. That's really not the case. They're locating next to Lake Stanford because it happens to be a place where a whole bunch of electricity comes into the substations and goes out and is interconnected.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a very complicated process, and it's a relatively new technology in the great scheme of things. And so obviously there's a ton of questions about it, especially related to how AI is connected to all this, because that's another conversation for another day, I'm sure. I think what we often forget about these organizations and the corporations that move into our area is they are ultimately in it for profit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're in business. They want to make money on this deal. And so they need those cheaper resources. Their goals are not necessarily to make our communities better. That's our job.
That's right.
As citizens and as a city management. So what was it that was appealing to the city of Stamford and to the city government to move forward with these projects as it relates to this that's going on at Stamford Lake?
Well, really, we've not had any involvement in deciding whether those projects take place.
Okay.
This property was sold by private landowners to private companies, and they started developing these projects. So it was not a situation. That's the beauty and the peril of the free enterprise system. People can do whatever they want to with their land. People can set stuff up without some sort of central planning locally to decide if we're going to allow it or not. So the extent to which the city would be involved would be if we're going to provide any incentives, economic development, that sort of thing, which we have not. O'Reilly's came to town recently. There's been some questions about that on the side of the old Cliff House. It is. He's with some local businesses, and somebody said, why did the city allow that? We did. They didn't ask us for any incentives. They bought a piece of property from a private landowner and decided they wanted to invest in Stanford.
Sure. Yeah.
And number one, people that want to invest in our area without us having to force it, which is something that our communities all over rural America have struggled with for decades. We've spent economic development dollars chasing jobs that haven't always maybe worked out as well as hoped, or haven't really provided the sort of good jobs, industrial type jobs. And I want to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
That we had in the past. And so it's been tough. So it's nice that there is interest in bringing jobs and bringing investment to our area that doesn't require the city of Stanford or our development corporation of Stanford to part with any of our hard-earned tax dollars, because we've got to keep our powder dry, as the saying goes, for stuff that we really need to help with. These folks are wanting to invest because of the cheap power, because of the cheap land. And then it's our job to say, okay, y'all are coming into this part of the world. Let's see how your interests align with the good of the future of our community.
Yeah, and that's something that I didn't realize. Now, the big question on everybody's mind, I think, is when they hear they're moving to Stamford Lake and they see, I was just online this morning. You see all sorts of stuff about data centers using water. And like every time I put something in the ChatGPT, it uses 3 bottles of water. And there's a lot of like weird questions about what is the water usage going to be. The room mill's churning pretty good about what's going down and relating to the water situation at Stamford Lake. Has Stanford actually struck a deal with Google to sell them water? Are we putting ourselves at risk for the future? Because I mean, you and I both lived in an era where Stamford Lake No, low. So I don't know. I don't know much about how the water situation works. Can you tell me a little bit more about, did we sell a bunch of water to Google?
Sure.
Are we at risk? Are we putting farms at risk? That sort of.
Sure. Well, let me be very blunt and clear on the front end. We have not made any long-term deals to sell any water to anybody, period. So I've heard several times myself that the city agreed to sell a whole bunch of water to Google for 40 years worth. None of that's not happening. So that's something that we would clearly talk about in an open city council session. Those meetings are public, open for folks to attend. We stream them on Facebook. Certainly encourage people to talk about that. Now, one of the things that we did do, that we have done, and we talked about this at length in several council meetings this summer, is we were contacted by construction folks working either with Google or some of the solar projects, Intersect Power that's going in out there, to talk about buying raw water for construction purposes. That's basically they get engage a local contractor to go put a straw in the lake and suck it out to use for mixing concrete, dust, remediation, that sort of stuff.
And we do that regularly.
Yes. We have sold water for every single solar project that's out near the lake, and several other big projects. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
We hadn't sold any in several years, but because it hadn't made anything happen. But that's something that's gone on. What we decided this summer is we've just kind of been doing those in the past decades on an ad hoc basis. We need an industrial water sale ordinance that says if we're going to sell water that's coming directly out of the lake for construction or industrial purposes, here's the rate. We made it. So we talked about that. We debated it in an open council session, approved it twice because that's required by our charter. And we made a deal that we would sell that water. We charged a very high rate. In fact, they griped about how high it was, $10 1,000 gallons, which is twice the rate that we charge our citizens for treated water. And this is raw water. You can't even drink this. And there's a limit on it, 200,000 gallons a day. To put that into perspective, our city on a cooler day like today is probably going to use about 500,000 gallons. On a real hot day in the summer, we'll use over 1 million gallons. So the reality is it's less if a pittance compared to what our use actually is in our capacity at the lake. And they can only use it for, it scales up after 6 months and that sort of thing. The price goes up. So their incentive is to use it quickly. If they use more than 200,000 gallons in a day per month, they don't get to use as much much water the next month. Like we've got it capped at that per user.
Okay.
Now, what we did with that simultaneously is we passed an ordinance for what we called it's the W.I.S.E fund. This is the Water Infrastructure and Sewer Enhancement Fund. So what we said is all of this money that's coming from those construction sales will be put into a dedicated account expressly for a single purpose, replacement of water and sewer lines. And I know that's something that our citizens really desperately crave, me too, is not just patching lines, but replacing them. So that money can only be used for that purpose, nothing else, and then it can be used to rebuild the streets on top of it as well. So, and just to put that in perspective, the first check that we got, we'll talk about transparency on this here in a minute, but the first check we got from one of those companies just a few weeks ago for their first month was $35,000.
Great.
So what we're talking about is water that's excess capacity. It's a very temporary project. It's going to put more money into our coffers for replacement of water lines than we've had during my lifetime.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited about that.
So the kind of like circling back to this one more time, just to be very clear for the folks watching, if Stamford Lake, it's been kind of droughty this year. It's not been full drought, but like it's not rained as much. Is there a point where the sales stop and that we don't put ourselves at risk?
Absolutely. And I want to talk about the data center processes here in a minute in the water, but let's talk about that because that covers all of this. Yeah. The city of Stamford has a drought contingency plan or water conservation plans. We've gotten into those over the years where the lake level is dropped and we've put folks, water limits on watering, after the drought in 2011, we kind of put it on strict once a week watering, nothing else.
Okay.
Every sale of water is subject to those drought contingencies. There is not a circumstance in which an industrial user gets an exception to the rule to say they don't have to curtail if our citizens are having to curtail.
And nobody just putting a straw in the lake, sucking water.
That's exactly right. And we've got the right in that ordinance to shut these sales off if it was a drought issue.
Gotcha.
We're really fortunate. We've been all the way through the end of the summer, and now had our first freeze last night. And our lake is effectively full.
Yeah.
Over the years, the city has invested the California Creek Diversion Project, which allows us to scout water off of California Creek. at periods of time. That enhances the lakes, so, allows us to kind of top off the lake when it's full.
Yeah.
For the last 15 years, the city of Stamford and some area of communities and counties have engaged in a cloud seeding program. As we say, that can't make it rain, but it can squeeze more water out of the clouds as part of it. And we're a firm believer that has helped put a little more water in the lake. And we're always looking at backups and redundancies upon redundancies. And, back in 2011, we were actually looking at some wells, like what might be viable as like an emergency water supply. And we're looking at some of those things again, because we want to make sure Stamford is very fortunate. We're one of the only communities in West Texas, and I'm including Abilene, Amarillo, Lubbock, Odessa, Midland in the category here. We're one of the only communities that owns and controls our own water supply with no other regional water authority that's a partner of it, and we have more water than we need. So the Texas Water Development Board projects that by 2060, we will only use 60% of the lake's capacity.
As it stands right now.
As it stands right now. Because we got to remember, the lake was built in the 1950s when the population of Stamford was over 5,000. So I always heard as a kid growing up that that Stamford had twice as much water it was actually needed. And that's pretty close to accurate.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
That's really neat.
So if you look at data centers online and you learn about the cooling systems, because you have a bunch of computers in a warehouse that's enclosed, they're going to get hot. They got to have some sort of cooling. That's natural. So there are three types of data centers cooling. There's air cooled, there's open water cooled where they just run water through them, and then there's the closed water cooled where they fill it, top it off periodically, but it's
Like a vehicle.
exactly like a radiator in a car. I'll be clear with you. If somebody came to the city of Stamford, whether it's Google or anybody else, and I've told companies this, if you came to us and said you wanted to buy water from us for open cooling of a data center, the conversation would end right there. I'm not interested under any circumstances to the city of Stamford selling water to a wasteful cooling process. And from talking to some of those companies, from doing research online, mostly myself, that's kind of the inefficient technology that a lot of these companies that are forward-thinking are moving away from. Everyone is moving to either an air-cooled system or a closed-loop system where like the radiator of the car, where you fill it up, top it off, which is much more, I don't like the word sustainable because it's kind of a loaded word in all areas, but it's much more manageable for areas, especially in these limited, water, semi-arid climates like West Texas. So that's what we'd be interested in. The downside to an air-cooled data center is that it uses more electricity. It uses fans instead of water. That's not within our control. That's something that our state leaders have to be mindful of, electricity prices, because I think that's a reasonable concern for everybody across the state. But we're not interested in selling any open water, water cooled
Situations, making sure that was
absolutely.
Thinking about resource, obviously water resource and things like infrastructure, stuff like that are really important conversations. Another question that's come up, and we can kind of address one question and go into another here, is the rumor that the population is going to increase significantly. I've heard there's some crazy stuff going around, like, Haskell and Stanford are going to be 5A schools in 5 years. I don't think that's going to happen. But that being said, we have seen that there is an obvious population increase happening. We've seen it through RV parks that are coming into town and filling up. The folks that are building outside in Jones County, there's people coming to town. I don't know how many that actually is. You may know better. But the big question is, when you have a population increase like that, you will inevitably be using more resources for fire, EMS, and police, which not only in Stamford, but in Haskell, Anson, everywhere, are already running on pretty shoestring budgets with lower amounts of staff. So how is Stamford either getting ready for that growth? What are y'all doing right now to address like more calls through EMS, more possibility of a rising crime rate in the area? What are some things that we're doing to prepare for that?
We're always thinking about that. The city of Stamford fully funds the Stamford Police Department, fully funds the Stamford Fire Department, and then the Stamford EMS is a joint project of the city of Stamford and the Stamford Hospital District. So we're always looking at ways to improve that. We run a pretty lean budget through our city.
Yeah.
It's about a $4.5 million budget, which sounds like a lot, but you look through that thing. Anybody wants to look at the budget, I'd be happy to send it to them. We've cut a lot over the years, back in the early, before I ran for mayor, when we were starting this water project and trying to figure out how to minimize the increase in water rate. We cut a lot of stuff out of that budget. you see a lot about bloated police force budgets in other towns that have gotten criticized rightly for that. Stanford's police budget is pretty lean. We've got our officers and chief, and that's pretty much it. And the labor costs there are well below the national average as a percentage of the city budget. Okay. So as more people, as more money comes into town, our sales tax revenues have been increasing since COVID, actually. COVID was a financial blessing for the city of Stamford because people were shopping here rather than going elsewhere. But those emergency services are primarily going to be funded by two sources: sales tax, so you buy things in Stamford, and property tax. It's on your homes and businesses. So when folks buy stuff in Stamford rather than Abilene or Amazon, like that impacts our ability for those emergency services. 100, something like 60% of every dollar of a small independent business stays local. Something like 40% of a big box chain stays local, and then 0% out of town or online stays local. So I'd much rather somebody shop at the Walmart here than a big box store in Abilene because that money is staying here. So as more people come to town, as these RV parks are bringing people into town, as people are buying new houses in town, building new houses in town, it's going to provide us more money in our city budget to serve all of those things. And our region has pretty good mutual aid when it comes. There's fires out in the country. Stamford, Haskell, Anson, they all respond together. Stamford works well with its neighboring EMSs for partnering up on transfers. If somebody's got to be gone, taking somebody to Abilene, then we cover that sort of thing. And our EMS and the Haskell EMS, they talked about how cover those areas out there, and that's a little bit beyond my day-to-day operation. But I know on the advanced risk, construction jobs and these things that are happening out in the area, then they will, those entities will work together and make sure it's taken care of. But on the question about crime in town, on the boomtown stuff, that's folks are concerned about that, and some of that can be valid. That's something that we shouldn't blow off because you see, boomtowns and in North Dakota and those small towns, or just the history of the boomtowns in West Texas, or even this part of the world, the crazy days in Breckenridge and Cisco and Ranger and those old towns. Things got wild. The best thing we can do is in our community is to just be mindful of things that are different. You're mindful of those things that change. The good thing about Stamford, as our chief will tell you, all the local miscreants are pretty much known. It's a lot of repeat offenders, and we can talk about, the criminal justice system beyond here and what creates that. But, there's not a lot of secrets on some of those things. So we're mindful of that. If new people are in town, there's that famous meme of Steve Buscemi, going undercover to high school, like, "How do you do, fellow children?" Yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious what he's doing. Like that's the same thing here. Like we're gonna be mindful of that, and we'll deploy as more money comes in. If we need to allocate more resources for law enforcement or specific things, we'll certainly do that. But I'm gonna tell you, the biggest thing that this community has done to minimize its criminal activity is the demolition of abandoned houses over the last 20 years. We've torn down hundreds of abandoned houses. And I cannot tell you how many of those that, I go in there and I came out, I might have tested positive for drugs just from walking in there and the smell in there. Like those abandoned houses are what basically facilitated, harbored such a drug culture and criminal element in our community for a lot of years. And the city and local partners have worked together to clean all that up. And as we continue to do that, it makes it more and more difficult for folks to commit those crimes. Councilmember Paul Wright likes to say, "Shine a light on the darkness, and the things of the dark will scatter." Yeah. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
I love that.
And hey, we need to be pointed out. There was this theft ring that was broken up recently by the city of Stamford, Hamlin, Anson, Jones County sheriffs, all the police working together. Some guys were living here and going to other places and committing burglaries, and all those agencies work together to break that up. And so there's some good. Our police are in this area are all working hard together. They're all mindful of that.
One of the things that I lived in Austin for several years, and one of the ways that the community tried to lower the crime rate in Austin in the metro was through a campaign where they encouraged you to get to know your neighbors.
Absolutely.
And it's easy in a small town to say, "Oh, well, I know all my neighbors." But I would just encourage folks, hey, get to know the folks on your street and your neighborhood. And then when we start caring for each other, those things the resources that the city needs to provide will actually be lessened because we're doing the work that we're supposed to be doing.
That's right. And, talking about knowing your neighbors, it's really easy. And I've had this conversation with people in a small town. Oh, everybody knows their neighbors. Well, do you? You might know their name. You know what they look like.
Yes. No, I know the all's names.
Yeah. Do you know what they do? What's priorities? Do you know what they do? Do you know how they're doing? Do you visit with them a lot? Neighborhood watches. They don't have to be organized. It could just be neighbors looking out for each other saying, hey, the house looks a little suspicious. There's a couple of my neighbors that I always do that for with them because it matters to us.
We care about our folks.
So what we're looking at here, and I've seen folks talk about, the boom that's going to happen, because the RV parks, a lot of this is related to construction of the solar farms and of the data centers. And what I've seen folks have expressed a reasonable concern about is that the city is going to invest money and make changes in a way for a boom that pops up and is real good and it's fleeting or temporary and it goes away. And then we're left with a bunch of, caliche parking lots that were once RV parks. Everything's empty. The city of Stamford is not investing in anything, not spending any money on anything that would be a boom type situation. If we're going to look at doing something, it's going to be for permanent, lasting growth. And I think the really, I'd say maybe cool part, interesting part, differentiator about data centers is the potential job creation. Because you see these wind farms, you see these solar farm projects that have popped up where over the last 20 years, where they're going to create hundreds, maybe even thousands of jobs in construction. But then when it's over, there's only a handful of, maintenance and operations jobs. So you can't really invest a lot of money for something that's not going to last more than a year or two. But the thing about data centers, and look at the job creation in Abilene, they're talking about this as well. This is not a trade secret by any means. You've got a gigantic warehouse full of computers. It's got to have computer technicians, electricians, engineers, receptionists, janitorial and custodial, security. There are opportunities that these things are going to create jobs all along the wage scale, from entry-level jobs all the way up to people with PhDs or, masters in engineering in Stanford.
Yeah.
And they understand they can't get, I don't know, let's say 500 jobs are created in all these data centers combined. They'll say that. They don't get 500 people to show up move to Stanford. They're going to need to hire some people. But those jobs, like a good paying security job or a electrician job, those are jobs that our kids can get coming out of Stanford High School and have a good paying blue collar job, industrial type job in our community in a way that America has deindustrialized, and especially in rural communities, that we haven't had those jobs at any scale in decades. Yeah. So that's what I'm excited about. I want folks to understand I'm not going to do anything that's going to promote or impact us in a boom-like atmosphere that doesn't last. I'm looking at this. I'm keeping my eye on the big prize, and that is the long-term job creation. Whether it be at the deal in Abilene, and folks, may want to drive back and forth there and have their kids at Stanford, or the stuff that may be created in this area. We want to encourage, if folks are going to be moving to the Rolling Plains area, whether it's Jones County, Haskell County, Taylor County, to work in a computer job or a technical job, I'd love for them to move to Stanford because we've got a good quality of life here, and have their kids at school here.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about Stanford growing. Let's be honest. Stanford needs to grow. What we don't want to happen, there are things that all of us like about Stanford the way it is.
Yeah.
Just the way it is. No traffic, that sort of thing. There's things that are great. Don't have to wait in line at all stuff to get a burrito except after the rodeo.
Yeah.
But we can't, our infrastructure challenges are such that we're asking a small number of people to pay a lot of money for declining infrastructure. Stanford was platted for 10,000 people. Its population peaked at just over 5,000, close to 6,000 in the 1950 census. So when people talk about why does Stanford have so many problems with its streets and its alleys and its water and its sewer, why does it have so many vacant lots? Why are there so many abandoned houses? That's because we have a town that's literally built to be twice the size that it is now. And so that's got Stanford and Haskell have roughly the same population. Stanford's landmass is twice that of Haskell. So we've got twice as many streets, twice as many vacant lots, twice as many roads, all that sort of stuff. Water and sewer. So if we want to be able to improve all of those things, we got to add to our tax base. New houses in town, new jobs, new people buying things in town and spending sales tax dollars, because that allows us to do those things. It also allows more people, because talk about, this week is the UIL enrollment snapshot for schools, and Stanford's going to drop down to the lower 2A, which is okay right now. So we got some smaller classes coming through. But if we want to have more kids in our school activities, that allows our school to offer more things. We can have more people come to Stanford, and we want them to come to Stanford, the Stanford that we love, and be part of our culture, not change it into something else. We don't want Stanford to turn into another faceless, suburb of DFW that doesn't even look like it resembled 20 years ago. So that's what we're looking for, is the long-term growth. And I want to tell you, I've told people, we've made a push for new housing to encourage developers. We just sold about 25 lots in town.
Heard that.
To build new houses, not to build RV parks, not to build anything other than, 1,000 square foot or bigger, stick-built permanent homes. I'm talking to a guy who's wanting to do a whole block of duplex development right now for, young families and teachers and stuff like that. Folks, there are people who want to move to Stanford every day.
Yeah.
They talk to me, they talk to our realtors, but they want to move to Stanford because they want to live here. They're from here. They want to be part of it. They want their kids in our schools, and they can't, because they can't find an affordable place to live. It's just not out there. They can't, they can't borrow $200,000 for a house, so they can't get a rent, an affordable rental. So we have desperately, if these data centers just disappeared out there, we still need new houses in Stanford for sure. And that's what I'm working on, is putting more new housing inventory in the market. And then the rents will come down as the law of supply and demand goes. Folks will have more options to choose from, and we'll see opportunities for folks to move here. Like, I can tell you, I was talking to one of our realtors about this. He and I combined knew about 10 different families that wanted their kids in school in Stanford this year and couldn't move here because they couldn't find a place.
Yeah.
And think about those kids and being in all of our activities and how much of a difference that would make. So that's what I'm looking at, is that permanent growth, the permanent desire to live in Stanford that already exists, and then the opportunity to build from that, on that growth.
Yes.
So you want to go ahead and talk about the emergency?
Yeah, let's pick up from there. Like, and you make a good point that Stanford needs. I mean, you don't want to go the way of a lot of other towns that we've had, and a lot of it's because of population loss. But we see more and more folks are moving from the city to the rural areas. So, data center or not, we're probably going to experience some form of growth at some point.
That's right.
Because we're a great town.
Somebody said, tell about Stanford being a 5A school. I don't think that's going to happen. But I told somebody the other day, I'll tell you my vision is, I think within maybe not 2030, but 2040, I think Stanford could be back at that 5,000 population.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, we're not changing Stanford to be something that it never has been. That's the Stanford that a whole lot of our people remember, that they grew up in. And if people say, man, I wish Stanford could be like it was with, more restaurants, more shopping, more things to do. That's how we do it, is restore Stanford's glory in the place that it was built to be. That's what excites me.
You need people to support your business.
That's exactly
things that come in here. I totally agree with that, folks. I think it's a good question or a good way to transition to the next question is, a lot of times, a lot of the folks that we can't know and they may not know are the folks living in RVs. We've already seen, one major RV park being put in town. I know there's several more in development in and around Stanford. Tell me about what the city is doing in terms of like ordinances. I know there's been a lot of concern. People like, well, I don't want people building RV parks in my neighborhood. And so I honestly don't know, like, is there any type of ordinances that are set out right now? How are we managing that? I mean, I guess what's kind of going on with RV parks right now?
So our city zoning ordinance allows RV parks to be in commercial areas. So the ones that you've seen where those have been, those, and then there's some limited ability to rezone like a manufacturing area. So there's a small one that's right behind St. John's Methodist Church that was it needed to be cleaned up, and they'll put in a small RV park there. That was a net improvement to that block. But for the most part, nobody's going to build an RV park in a residential area. I mean, if they start, then the city will cite them because that's not allowed.
Gotcha.
So they got to be in commercial areas. And, we've kind of put a little bit of a moratorium on issuing new permits till we get some stuff in place because, we got hit with a lot of permits.
Oh,
there's more RV parks than we've ever experienced in town. And that's okay. I'm glad folks are investing. They're doing it on private property. If it's zoned for a RV park, it allows that. The city can't say, no, we don't like that. We're not going to do it because people voted against you. It doesn't work that way. That's not how our community works. But we're going to be very limited on any rezoning stuff. We're not going to let somebody do it in a residential area. We're not going to do anything other than if it enhances the area that already exists and it's kind of a place where you might put one, we're not going to allow it. actually Monday night at the council meeting, we're going to approve an ordinance for setting new standards for RV parks. This is something the city of Albany had just in Shackford County just approved some ordinances like this because they've got some stuff happening with that Stargate project that's really moving into Albany.
Gotcha.
And several folks sent it to me. I'd actually already read it. I was really excited about it. I've talked to some other cities, got some other ideas from some stuff other cities are doing, but it's more about the aesthetics of the RV park. A fence around it, making sure it looks nice, making sure it's not just a cliche parking lot.
Yeah.
And just kind of give some eye appeal. And that's going to be required for any new RV park that we permit. That's going to have these standards. But we're also going to have some conditional use on it, where we can say like, hey, that's a real bad place for the exit for traffic. Like, why don't you move it there? And they don't like that. Sorry, I'm not going to issue a permit.
Yeah.
So we're exercising that control moving forward of what we can do to make sure that the RV parks that come in after this, number one, are a nice bit of eye appeal to the community. And people like it and say, hey, that's a really cool investment. But also, after this is gone, the boom part is gone, that we want those folks to continue to thrive if you should tourist RV park. Because, there's a ton of demand for RV parks. There's some DCR and other parks.
Well, even beyond that, when I was serving as the Chamber of Commerce manager, I spoke to one of our owners of the RV park here, and they were boomed and they were blocked out. And this was like January this last year. They were blocked out past the rodeo.
Yeah.
And so there's need for it. I mean, some of that is related to some of the stuff that's going on here. But Stamford has a good draw, surprisingly good draw for things like lake activities, our hunting community, and the way that has grown in a way that I never anticipated it. Folks travel from well out of state to come hunt here. And so I think if there's ways for us to incentivize tourism beyond that, I think that'll help those not turn into just giant lots.
Exactly right. Something that people are proud of. And we're going to tell folks, on the giant lots one on the moving forward, like, hey, after this is over, we'd like to see you build something else there. Because there are places, I've actually talked to one guy about wanting to do an RV park. That's zone 4 on the bypass. It's a good spot for it. It's got some tourist appeal. And his idea is maybe put in some modular homes or some stuff like cottages for people to rent.
I lived in a tiny home.
I told him, I was like, exactly. I was thinking about you. I told him, I was like, man, that'd be a great addition. Like, I'm going to like you being part of ARC, because you're looking more than 6 months ahead. You're looking 5, 10, 20 years ahead.
Exactly. The community that I lived in Austin was a tiny house community and built in an RV.
Yeah.
And it was probably one of the best places ever.
And it's great for young couples, singles, they make a new teacher that doesn't need a yard or something like that.
Right.
And something else I want to address on that, RV parks, we can't charge them hotel motel tax.
Sure.
The state, I actually spoke to a city down the coast because it's something on their website that had made me think that maybe they were doing it. I called them, was like, hey, y'all doing this? I want to know about it. And they said, well, they'd been trying and their attorneys have told them you really can't.
Yeah.
So you can't charge hotel motel tax on an RV because the stays are over 30 days.
Which, just to be clear, that's a tax that our hotels pay back to the city. Then the city distributes those funds to places like the Chamber of Commerce, and the museum, and other places.
Yeah, and so that's a significant part of the budget. So those two entities, and we've seen our hotel motel tax grow significantly. I mean, like double in the last few years, and that's exciting. We've determined that it applies to Airbnbs. We've talked about that in council. We're going to extend that to the Airbnbs in the community. We're trying to get that set up with Airbnb, so it's collected at the point of sale by Airbnb, and our property owners are not having to do it themselves. But RV parks, you really can't. But in this ordinance, we're going to actually have an annual per space fee that's as a permitting fee that we can figure out kind of what we want to do with that money, whether it goes back to the city budget or whatever. But that'll be in that, and that's actually something the city of Albany had done. So we want to do that as well.
One last thing before we move on to another part of the conversation is when people look at the things that are happening in Stamford, they're like, well, we need to be spending money right now on our streets and water. And you've addressed already kind of what that looks like with the W.I.S.E fund. There have been several beautification projects that are happening. We hear about the square renovation that's going on. Part of that was publicly or privately through donations like that through this downtown association, the community fund, and other was grant that I think you've talked about before.
Yeah.
From the one of the government
department.
One of the governments, and then we have things like we're trying to do some beautification at the parks, and we have. I'm a firm believer that beautification projects are just as important as any other project in town. Because we all want nice places to live. My road down my street is bad, and I'm so grateful for Pete. He was out filling potholes the other day. But I mean, Pete's job is never ending. So I would love to see new streets and water that works all the time. But I also believe in having nice, beautiful places, and I think you do too. Tell me why you think that's important in this era to have beautification projects that are ongoing.
People ask about that, like, why are you spending money on the library when you could be spending on the water lines? Well, those are different funds. The folks that gave us a $3 million grant for the library renovation, we're not going to give us $3 million for the streets. And so if it comes to that money, that you got to choose between this pot of money, you choose between infrastructure and quality of life. Infrastructure is a higher priority. So we look at those issues where people are willing to give us money for quality of life stuff, that it takes that burden off the maintenance of the library and other things so that the city has more money to use on water and streets. And actually, we're working right now. We've still got a little bit of money left over from the big $20 million water project, a couple $100,000. And they're actually finishing up the priority list of the water lines that we're going to replace with those funds. And when we release that list, I've kind of been privy to some of those conversations because I've told them what's my priority. It's going to be some water lines that people are going to go, oh, thank goodness, because they're some of the worst streets in town. And as soon as that's done, we're going to resurface the street over the top of it.
Yeah.
And as this new money comes in from the raw water sales, as sales tax, property taxes, as that increases in our town, all of that money is going to get poured back into improving those things, because we know that we want to continue. The way I see it is our quality of life. We want to continue a steady increase in those things, but also make these big jumps on infrastructure simultaneously and use that money, figure out the best way to allocate all of that money to the highest and best priority for each of those dollars. But you're right. If we wait to fix all of our water and sewer lines before we improve the park or the library, we'll never get that done. And then the folks, 50 years later, the folks, that had the opportunity to move here, but, didn't have it or didn't enjoy it like they can. So it's a challenge to do both of those things at once, but it's got to be done. But hey, you look in DFW, those highways are always under construction. At the same time, they're building new parks. At the same time, they're building new amenities. That's just the nature of the beast of local government.
Right.
It's a challenge. It's a multifaceted challenge. It's never ending for someone in this position, but that's okay.
James, this been really great. Conversation that we're having. I think you're really hitting on some good points here. I want to get to some of the questions that you received on your Facebook page.
And we've kind of covered a lot, and some folks should hold those questions into questions you asked.
Yeah,
they did good.
I looked at your posts, and there were so many really thoughtful questions, and I appreciate everybody who put stuff.
It's kind of cool that everybody kind of sees the priorities are aligned. Hey,
Yeah.
we understand water is important. We're concerned about specific things. Like it shows the nature of the community that folks are all kind of looking at it with one vision from different perspectives.
Absolutely. And, social media is never the best place to have conversations, which is why I wanted to actually have us do a video for people to see your face, to engage with you. You and I have talked about other ways in which you can communicate that I think will be beneficial down the road. But I think this is a great start to the conversation. And so I want to hit a couple just personal questions from folks that I thought were really insightful. And it may not be something that we covered in the larger conversation that we just had.
Let's do it.
So James D, not you, James D, was asking about where citizens can find and track the amount of water sold and the dollar amount collected that is going to be deposited to that W.I.S.E account you talked about.
So I saw that question from James D. He's got a great name. And I thought that was a really good question, because that's something that I did say, like, hey, we want to keep our citizens up to date. I'm still trying to figure out the mechanism of that. Probably what we'll do is probably post a monthly update on the city website to say, this is how much money is in the W.I.S.E fund. And then as we start allocating that money out, we're going to say, hey, there's $500,000 in the W.I.S.E fund. We're spending $75,000 of it on replacing this line from this point to this point, and communicate all that. But my goal right now is to do that on the city front page at StamfordTX.org.
I think it's only in Stamford you would have folks interested in which pipes are being changed. And I mean, it's, that it is, it's one of those things. And so I think that's a great plan for y'all to have it publicly announced. Jordan N was asking, and you may not know the answer to this, but just kind of projecting, do you think the growth in town will have a effect on our property taxes?
Yes, it should make them go down.
Really? Tell me more about
So City of Stamford set our property tax rate has been 0.98 cents per $100.
Just like y'all, how much control does the city have over our property tax?
So we can set the rate. We do not set the valuations.
Okay.
So when you get your tax bill, you pay taxes. If you live in Stamford proper, you pay property taxes for the city, the hospital district, the county, and the school district.
Okay.
And each of those entities sets their own rate. But the valuations, it's the rate times the valuation. And that's your tax bill. And the valuation is set by the Jones County Appraisal District. And, that entity, Jones County is very jumbled. It's a jigsaw puzzle of taxing entities. There's 5 cities, school districts. I think there's something like 25 different tax entities have property taxes in some part of Jones County.
Okay.
Whereas, to put an example, like Haskell is probably like less than 10. So it's very difficult. It makes the Jones County Appraisal District, but nobody can get to control it. So it's a struggle. And we all get frustrated about our valuations going up. I get frustrated about them. I protest my property taxes. So the city doesn't control your valuation, but it does control your rate.
Okay.
We have not raised property taxes a single time on my watch as mayor. And actually last year, for the first time in a long time, maybe my lifetime, the city actually lowered its tax rate. And the reason that we did that is because it's a new state law requirements that if your tax revenues go up, your estimated property tax revenues go up above a certain threshold, you either have to lower them or you have to put it to the voters to whether to allow that. These are some of the property tax reforms that the state has done. I don't like everything the state does with property taxes, but for the most part, I think this intention is good because we actually lowered our property tax rate by a nickel and we still went up on our revenues and our tax revenues.
Cool.
So as we get more tax base in town, like we're talking about a city that's built for 5,000, you add 100 more, whatever you pay for your city property taxes on your house, $1,000, 500, whatever that is, multiply that by 50 new houses and 100 new houses. That is more property tax revenue that relieves the burden from you as an individual. Now, so what the city is going to have to do, because actually you see this in really booming suburbs like Weatherford, Decatur, that's a good example because that's the closest to us. Their tax base increases, 20, 30% in a year because of new development. They have to lower their tax rate enormously because their tax revenues are going up and they're going to get in trouble with the state if they don't. So you should see your tax rate with the city come down. Hopefully other tax entities as well. The school property tax is a really difficult way to fund rural schools. For sure. But hopefully, and they're capped out on that. And, we receive money from the state due to our small tax base at the school. But hopefully as new properties come in, because that's something the city's prioritizing. We also want new investment, new tax base to be in our school district. So the school has more money to spend on teachers, raise teacher salaries, and do all of those things.
Gotcha.
So from the city perspective, we hope to see our tax rates continue to come down, but we don't control that valuation. And I think what Jordan something else that she may be concerned about rightly is, it's all this new demand in town for new houses. Is it going to cause our property values to go up? And I think that's something that each of us as a citizen should be mindful of and protest that. There were some issues at the appraisal district this past year where a lot of vacant lots in town and some stuff was raised that didn't really make sense. And the city investigated and it was a glitch apparently, and we got it fixed and lowered the taxes. But I would encourage every person that if you get that notice of appraised value in May and you think that your house is worth more than it actually is, you need to protest it and say, hey, I don't believe this. And so as we move forward, if we see values, in some ways, I don't want to criticize the appraisal district entirely because it's in some ways our hands are tied by the state.
Yeah.
Because the state says, well, you've got to keep raising your values because of state averages. Well, property values are going up in Dallas County and Harris County.
It's all more expensive. Yeah.
Exactly. Things ought to be going up in Jones County. So as we get, they get forced into some valuation increases. Hopefully with more in tax base coming into the county, they won't be forced in that situation. But as new tax base comes in, and if we're concerned about those valuations, we will advocate for you on the valuations and certainly encourage you to advocate for yourself. Because you don't talk to somebody that's ever protested their taxes. If you show up in there and say, my house is not worth more than this because I said so and I'm mad, they're not going to listen. But if you come in there and say, hey, it's really not worth this and here's why, they listen. And if you got some details behind it, they will work with you on that. So I know several folks that got their tax bill lowered pretty significantly this past year because they showed up with data.
Interesting. Well, and talking about rising costs of things, Michelle H. was asking about the electricity costs in our community. And again, I don't think that y'all have any control over that or any of the utility other than water and sewer, basically. I mean, what can you tell us about, do you foresee costs going up for those things too?
That's a very real concern in Texas and all across America, that this enormous increase in data centers is sapping our electrical grid, using more electricity than we've got really available to sell, and that rates are going up as a result of that. I wish the city of Stamford had that control to set our local rates, whether we had our own local electric utility or something, but we don't. I still think Texas deregulating electricity rates was a terrible idea that they never should have done 20 years ago or whenever that was, but they didn't ask my opinion on the matter. I think that's a concern for all of us. And I think that's something that we need to be advocating with our state legislators for them to get a rein on that. But I've talked to people that are data center developers, guys that study the power industry online and read their work online. And I think one of the critical things is that the government, state government and federal government have to encourage more development of electricity power sources onto the grid, because it's a scarcity issue that when power is going up, frankly, you got power companies are charging more money because they can. If there's more power out there on the grid, that relieves the pressure off of the grid. And I think one of the best things that has come into technology in the past decades is the battery storage in the electric. Like if you follow along, Texas gets, especially even on nights and weekends, Texas is getting a ton of power from battery storage. And that was technology that didn't exist. I mean, you see that wind turbine out there, it spins, but if it's not being used, then, it just goes away. But now we're able to store that electricity. And I think that's very important. And those battery storage facilities are pretty low footprint. Store a lot of power on a little property, a couple acres or something. I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
And that's something that's more of a statewide question. That's not a local thing. But I think that's a very real concern that I hope our folks can be on top of. And we'll certainly advocate for our citizens of Stamford.
Sure. I appreciate it.
Because it's really not going to be an issue of you built a data center outside of town here, therefore our power is going to go up.
Gotcha.
It's more of a strain on the statewide grid. There are some areas in the United States where there's a data center going in this place and our power is going up because that's a locally controlled utility or something. And that's completely different circumstances.
Gotcha. Heather S. was asking about impossibility of an emergency room or urgent care facility being opened in Stamford.
So, we all know that emergency care is high priority. And that's something that we lost when the Stamford Hospital closed its emergency room in 2018. I wish I had a good answer on that. But until, our knuckleheads in Washington can't even keep a government open, much less deal with pressing issues like rural health care. Stamford is a flashpoint of the problem that's widespread in rural healthcare, of hundreds of local ERs closing around the country because of just the train wreck that is healthcare in this country. I can't tell you that we're going to be able to open an emergency room back in Stamford. I would love to see that happen. I do think if it were to happen, it would be something like an emergency care, not like an inpatient hospital, which is fine. I don't think that's people's, as we've talked about this over the last decade, people are not so concerned about having an inpatient hospital as they are having an ER.
Sure.
Things with like the urgent care and the walk-in emergency rooms in Abilene and places like that, Lubbock. I've talked to those folks. Those are almost entirely private pay and private insurance. They don't accept Medicaid and Medicare. And in Stamford, you've got roughly 2/3 of our population uses Medicare and Medicaid. So the only answer is going to be something that works with Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements. But one thing that we've tried to do over the past, 7 years since the ER closed is increase and improve the level of service with Stamford EMS. The city and the hospital district have poured more money into it to provide better benefits, have better employee retention. And now we're at the point where we've got trained paramedics on practically every run. My vision, I've said this several times on Facebook and otherwise, is to continue to improve that. Because what I think that we need to see that ambulance as a rolling emergency room that provides ER level care. I mean, you may not have a doctor, but you're going to have paramedics that are first-rate folks. We've got some really talented people working for the Stamford EMS. And if you can provide that rolling emergency room there, that makes people feel a lot better and provides because it's a critical point of access. Even if you were taking them back to the ER in Stamford, they still got to get from where they're at to the ER.
Yeah.
But I do hope that maybe we can improve some of those other things. I know the Stamford Hospital District, has worked. People say, well, we don't have a hospital district. We have a hospital district. But that hospital district pays for the EMS for half of it, for the clinic out there and a lot of those services. And they're actually working right now to double down and focus on those primary care services and improve them. Because the hospital district has been through some really terrible financial straits that were inflicted by some partnerships that went awry and just the general rural healthcare landscape that led to kind of those, situations where they're trying to keep the thing alive.
Yeah.
As we're finally getting through that and they're paying down their debt and doing a really good job of that, that's going to free up more money for them to do more and better things. So it's exciting. I think I'd say I'm cautiously hopeful that our emergency medical care in Stamford will continue to improve.
Gotcha. We talked a little bit about some business development in town, and there was a question that came from Cheryl R., who asked about any assistance that is given to new businesses in order to support the influx of new customers to our area. And I would add to that too. Is there any incentive for new businesses, like maybe like a chicken place?
There you go.
Buzz goes around town on. In all seriousness, are there things that the city's trying to do, or chamber or the development corp are trying to do to help promote new business and sustain new business in town?
The city's economic development work is primarily conducted through the Development Corporation of Stamford. Every sales tax dollar in Stamford includes a half cent that goes towards economic development.
Yeah.
And Stamford's very fortunate because of the Walmart, Tractor Supply, several other businesses in town that are a large volume, in addition to every one of the small businesses that they all add up. Stamford is a very large volume of economic development sales tax money that not every city in the area has. But, I looked at some comparable numbers in some area towns, and I was shocked how small their EDC budget was. So that money, the city has worked very hard to strengthen, or the EDC has worked very hard to strengthen existing businesses, to give grants for new equipment or for improve their facade, which has improved the downtown. So I would encourage anybody that is interested in growing their existing business, maybe they've got an online business, they want to take to brick and mortar, or they've got a new business idea, or they want to do something, is to go talk to the Development Corporation of Stamford, to Jim Aston that runs that, the board, we got every one of those board members is a business owner, a hardworking citizen that invests in their own business and also has volunteers their time for the good of the community. Talk to those folks about your idea. One good thing that Jim has done, he and I've talked about this, is, if folks come with a new business, first thing he does is ask them if they have a business plan. If they don't have a business plan, he sends them over to the Small Business Development Center in Abilene. It's a function, it's an outreach of Texas Tech University, so that there's a plan and an idea. And the city doesn't charge for that. We just help people get that plan together, and then the EDC looks to see where they can help. So we really don't have any money allocated within a city budget for business development. That's what the EDC is for. But I also encourage people to talk to me if they've got an idea, want to visit about it, because sometimes I'll help them put them in the right direction, set them up with a private landowner who maybe wants to, renovate a building for them, or point them in the right directions to grants and other things that are out there. And I will say, Cheryl was the one that, she should know, and Christine Isbell over in Haskell was the one, a good example. She actually got a grant from Texas Women's University for being for a female business owner.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And there's some of those grants for female and minority-owned businesses that make you eligible for some private foundation grants out there that, hey, I'd love to get some of that money in Stamford for folks that have good ideas. She talked to a female in town yesterday who was wanting to start a food truck. And I was like, man, we need to talk. I got some ideas for you. So there's a lot of opportunity there. It's expensive to put in a restaurant. It's expensive to put in a brick and mortar business. I encourage people to start small. Melissa's Food Truck Park has really given us an opportunity for people to kind of be a business incubator.
Sure.
One of the coolest ideas that I heard about, one of the most famous barbecue restaurants in Texas, Pecan Lodge in Deep Ellum in Dallas. He started with a barbecue pit at the Dallas Farmers Market. He didn't spend millions of dollars on a building to start. He did this and created this following, and then he had a permanent stand at the Dallas Farmers Market, and then he built this incredible barbecue facility. It just kind of grew it step to step. And I've had a vision that I'd love to see people do that, whether they start at Melissa's or they start with the Jones Haskell Farmers Market with Tommy Beard. If you've got an idea for a business like that you think could scale up, man, I'd love to help you and support you.
Yeah, I think it's great. I was the recipient of multiple grants from the DCOS for my personal businesses. And I always told folks, like, come in with a plan. Like, you need two things to start a business. You need a plan and you need money.
Yeah.
If you go in with either one of those, the DCOS is there to help you. And the Chamber of Commerce as well is there to provide resources for you as well.
So, and that's the cool thing, Preston, you did a great job at the Chamber. And when you stepped down from that job and ran the Grand, people in town were going, oh my gosh, Preston, is he leaving town? It's like, no, this guy built such a successful business that it ran him out of his part-time job. So exactly. Yeah, so you're a good example of that.
Well, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation today. I feel like I'm invested. I swore up and down after leaving in 2006 that I would never come back to this town. And honestly, I thought, I said this publicly before, when I graduated in '06, the consensus was, I think that Stamford was about to die out. That was going to dry up and die out, and that was going to be it. And I think that's the mentality that a lot of folks had. But I think in the last, I don't know how many years, you've been here longer than I have now, but you've seen a rejuvenation in the pride, in the spirit of town. And I think that's one of the things that this community didn't let the spirit die. We're proud of our town. We're proud of our schools. We're proud of the businesses. We're supportive of our businesses. And I think that spirit of pride is going to continue. And so I appreciate you taking the time today. I want to give you one more opportunity to just kind of share any closing thoughts that you had with our group here that's watching us. Anything you would want to say to just encourage us as we move forward.
Well, I would just say that folks' concerns, questions they've asked me, the things that I've heard, sometimes out there, you hear rumors, the old game of telephone that are not true. But I think everything that I heard comes from a good place. I think everybody that I've spoken to all along the spectrum, from very negative to very positive, has good intentions, that wants our community to be the place that they care about. And it's kind of filtering out what we can do, like the things that have to change. I mean, we can't be in a mentality where we need things to improve, but we don't want anything to change. If no new people, no new businesses, no new investment comes in, we can't fix our power, our water in our streets and our sewer lines. We can't bring those restaurants in. We can't get a chicken place. We can't, my vision, 25 years ago, occasionally somebody comes back to Stamford and they haven't been to Stamford in decades, and they're like, man, downtown looks kind of rough. I saw a couple of vacant buildings. It's like, man, you should have been here 25 years ago when over half the square was empty. Now, I was talking to a guy last week about wanting to start a business in the downtowns and put it downtown, and kind of limited in the spaces, and it's exciting. We've made many strides in improving our community. That didn't mean we don't have a lot of work left to do. We do, but we're so far ahead of where we were 25 years ago or 30 years ago, or, and it's very exciting. And you're right, because that consensus, the people my age and your age, that, people are not going to come back. And I was hard-headed and stubborn. I got that from my granddad and his Decker family roots, to be too hard-headed and stubborn that I couldn't do something. And I always wanted to be part of this community and come back and help see it restore. Like I said, not build something new, restore it to its former glory. And if you look at the number of people in this town, we have young kids in school that are Stamford graduates.
Yes.
The people that don't even have kids yet, that are like 20 years old and just bought houses in town, because they're invested in our community. That's so cool. And we've got a lot of good things going. Somebody said years ago that if your town is not, talking about you want your kids to leave, and they said, well, if your town's not good enough for your own kids, how can you expect it to be good enough for somebody else's kids? And I've used that many times, because what I want to see, and there's one reason why I'm so passionate about our Stamford Bulldogs and the Stamford FFA and the band and the UIL and the SCCLA and all the cool stuff we've got going on at the school, is that is the future of our community. If all those kids that go to that school leave and none of them ever want to come back, Stamford will die. But if those young people want to come back and they want to be part, they know the community cared about them and supported them, not just when they were between the lines competing. There's that old, Friday Night Lights, the TV show or the movie and the book, where it was like, after they were done being Odessa Permian Panthers, or town was done with them and didn't care about it. That's not the way we do it in Stamford. We want those folks after they're done competing. It's like, all right, we're proud of your accomplishments there, and we can't wait to see all the great things you're going to do as an adult, that we want you to be part of the Stamford community. Sure. Because I want to see all those kids that are becoming legends, of our Stamford High School. I want them to be business owners. I want them to run for office. I'd love to have them on the city council. Maybe one of them will replace me as mayor one day. I think that's possible. That's why everything needs to center around our kids, because that truly is the future of our community. And a community that cares about its kids is a community that other people with kids want to move to.
Sure.
I cannot tell you how many people, since we made our pool free admission all summer long, have told me, man, y'all's town really cares about its kids. You're like, darn right we do. We want our kids to enjoy the summers here and not look up and like, oh gosh, I can't wait to get out of this terrible place. Yeah. So that's my focus, is I want this to be a place that's enjoyable for families to live, that they want to move here, because that's how we keep this town alive. And that's how we reach that goal of not a 5A school. That's how we reached that goal of Stamford when it was a 3A school, and Stamford at its peak in the 1950s. And I want I say just on the business development thing, I kind of have two visions. Downtown needs to be the heartbeat of our community. You could have everything cool that you wanted in the bypass and on North Swenson, and if downtown is dead, everybody would go, man, that's, well, that's cool, but we're recording this video in the Pinnock Hughes building, and the Pinnock Hughes downtown, the biggest building downtown, was always that but building, that it was the vacant my entire life, and now it's got new life into it. Now there's going to be 600 people here tomorrow at the Hunters Appreciation Dinner. We're recording this on October 30th. It's so cool. And to see this building come back to life.
Sure.
And so I want to see that, but I also want to see us develop our bypass with folks that give people a reason to stop.
Yeah.
For years, people that had never been to Abilene would drive through I-20 and be like, is there anything in Abilene? It's just a wilderness out there on the interstate. And now, some private landowners, some people with the vision to say, hey, what can we do on the interstate? Now you drive through Abilene on the I-20, you kind of know some stuff's happening there.
Yeah.
And it's cool. It has really allowed the rest of Abilene to grow and thrive. We need to do the same with the 277 bypass. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have a bypass. I maintain the highway bypasses and the interstate highway system were the greatest destruction of the rural economy ever conceived since the Industrial Revolution, but I'll leave that for another video. But we have that bypass out there. We need folks to drive by there and say, man, there's a fast food restaurant, there's a hotel, chain, a name brand there that I know I can trust. And then they do that, and then they're probably going to come to town. Maybe they'll get breakfast in the morning. Maybe they'll stop and get gas. Maybe they'll get a world famous sausage burrito they've heard the mayor talking about. There's a lot. There's a lot that we can do. We've got Stamford. Stamford has an incredible past. Our history is really special. Business, people that have been involved in politics, the Texas Cavalry Union, the Stamford Bulldogs. Our history is really special. And it's what makes the future of this town so important. We're not trying to create something out of whole cloth like a suburb that's a 6A school that didn't even exist 20 years ago. We've got a really unique heritage to build off of and grow from. And that is what I spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week worrying about and thinking about. And why my wife has told me, please get a podcast or write something so she doesn't have to listen to it around the house. But that's what we're after. We're after creating a community that in 2050, people are going to go, man, that place is just as cool as it was in 1950. And that's what I'm going for. So that's my, sermon at the end. But I'm really passionate about the opportunities that we have before us. They've got to be handled with care. We can't, if somebody comes to us and wants to buy water on a lasting deal, it's got to be something that's a really good deal. I've used the term, it's a term of art, highway robbery. If somebody wants to come buy our water from our city, pieces of our water, then we want to make sure it's the best possible deal for our citizens. And I want to touch on that a little more here, because for years, the city of Stamford sold water to the city of Hamlet, sold over 1 million gallons a day to Hamlet. And then, they're is between 200 and 400,000 gallons there at the end. And when the city lost that contract 25 years ago, that was where the city's infrastructure really started to deteriorate. And that was where the city really got into some financial straits that we've recovered from.
Yeah.
But, the city used to sell a bunch of water to the WTU for the power plant out there. And that went away as well. So we've got the excess capacity of water that we sold for the entire life of the city of Lake Stamford. So right now we're at that point where these data centers, they do want to come ask us about a long-term deal. Number one, our citizens, you're not going to find out about after the fact. We'll be discussing it, what we're going to do in public. And it won't be for open cooling, I can guarantee you that. But it's going to be one of those deals that we had that Hamlin contract. How do we get that revenue back? And how do we use that to make sure that Stamford in 2050 is the new and improved version of the Stamford of 1950?
Yeah. That's great. Well, if you made it to the end of this conversation, bless you. Congratulations. Hopefully we're going to be able to cut this down into bite-sized segments for those folks who want to have that as well. James, where do people need to go if they have more questions, if they want to find out more information, and where's the best place for them to go for that?
They can contact me. They can look me up, stop by my office on the square. I always encourage folks to make an appointment. Don't just drop in because you never know where I'm at or what I'm doing, or I'm busy with someone else or something else.
To let people know, the mayor is not your full-time job. You actually work to make money.
I had a friend asking me a while back, I said, are you still practicing law? And I said, well, the mayor job only pays $50 a month. I kind of have to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the mayor is my volunteer job. I'm a lawyer by day and night sometimes, right across from City Hall. Come to City Council meeting. We meet on the first and third Mondays at 5:15. You have a really intelligent, thoughtful and forward-thinking city council working for you.
Absolutely.
One of the best city councils that I think maybe the city of Stamford has ever had.
I can attest to that.
And we're really blessed there. You can, I write. I had a lot of words. Follow me on Facebook. I've got a Substack, West of 98. That's called. You can just find that at westof98.substack.com.
Okay.
I'm going to do some specific writing about data centers, solar farms, facilities, the electrical grid, some stuff. I'm going to do some of that in the future because that's the genesis of my writing there. If you subscribe, it's free. This is my passion of like revitalizing rural Texas, all in America, and all my thoughts on it there. So it's everything from the cheap food policies of the USDA to new investment in our communities to the homecoming bonfire. I get all those things mean, and I have lots of thoughts on all of that.
Yeah.
Also, we're going to hopefully put this on YouTube. Sure. We just launched last night the Stamford Broadcasting Company. Pretty excited to see where this is going to go. We've partnered with Big Country Crop Insurance on that. So they're doing the Stamford Bulldogs Coaches Show. We're going to put it there on YouTube.
Okay, cool.
And then I want to do like this. I want stuff like this on there because I've not been a video guy. I'm not a YouTube guy. But YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world. For sure. People get on there and search everywhere more than anything else except Google. And YouTube is owned by Google. So I want our stuff to be on YouTube. So if somebody puts in Stamford, Texas on YouTube, I want to get on there and I will think, man, these goobers really love their town. And darn right we do. Go Stamford.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, I really appreciate you taking all this time to discuss things with me. And I think this has been a great conversation. I hope to have another one down the road.
Let's do it.
But I'm excited about Stamford as well. So thank you so much for this time, and we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you, Preston. It's been fun.